Hello there, I'm Rob Caskie, proudly engaging in storytelling, and I hope that you are enjoying these stories that I'm trying to share on Patreon. In Africa and in African culture, particularly south of the Sahara, Africans have a long history of carrying sticks. The Nguni people have a long history of carrying a stick for defense purposes in their right hand and always walk with their partner or their family on the left, that they are freely available to use their right hand and their stick to defend their family against the attentions of some unwanted stranger or that of wildlife. And I have never told a story in 20 years of this wonderful vocation without a stick. I have a stick in my logo. I use a stick in every single presentation I've ever given. And isn't it wonderful to consider that when the Africans have an indaba or an imbazo, an important meeting, they have a talking stick. There's a small stick that is passed around, and you may not speak unless you are in possession of the stick. And as a result, sticks have become an integral part of my branding, of my storytelling culture. And it's interesting how many people I meet, perhaps at Heathrow or walking down Oxford Street in London, who will come up to me and say, "Hey Rob, where's your stick?" So a stick really has become an integral part of my persona and indeed of my storytelling. This magnificent stick that I'm holding is a typical Nguni club. It was given to me by a dear friend, John, who lives in the Eastern Cape. And he had, as a livestock trader, begged an old Xhosa who was in possession of this stick for a long time to sell him the stick, and the old Xhosa refused. And after years of banter and interaction and negotiation, that old Xhosa eventually agreed to sell my friend John this stick, which are often admired in his home. And as the years have passed, John eventually decided that this magnificent stick should become part of my collection and indeed be in my home. And I'm very proud of the way the stick has turned out. I've oiled it lovingly a number of times with a very large head and a very strong shaft. And you can imagine just what sort of a weapon this is. You could probably disable a firearm. You could certainly disable a human being with a strike of a club like this to the leg or to the head. And this stick enjoys pride of place in my collection. Now, the stick that I've used often for the telling of these stories is a beautiful whitewater elder stick. These sticks are a bit like the mangroves, the Naxia positifolia, and this head is in fact part of the root, and these lovely straight saplings grow up out of the rivers and the river banks in parts of northern KwaZulu-Natal. And this stick, I was fortunate enough to relieve a poacher of on the Fugitives Drift property. I split the bark and had it heated on a fire to take off the bark and create this wonderful ridged wood to expose it underneath. And I've shaped the head to fit beautifully into my hand. And I want to tell you that this stick is the stick that I choose to do most of my battlefield tours and talks with. I treat it as an old friend. It's beautifully straight. It's almost as straight as a snooker cue. I know its length, and I can use it as a river, as a windowsill, as a door, as a shield, as a rifle. And indeed, it sits next to me in the car, alongside of my legs when I'm driving to the battlefields. And whenever I get out to make a point to my special guests, it is this stick that I most often use as my cue and my pointer. Now, to give you some idea of some of the early fighting sticks and fighting clubs of the Zulu people, a typical Zulu club would look like this. And you're probably wondering why it's offset in terms of the shaft. Well, I don't want to appear incredibly gruesome in this lovely little video, but the bottom line is that a blow from a club is best applied to the back of the head. And when the head itself is offset from the shaft, it's much easier to what the Zulus call to brain someone, to hit them on the back of the head and disable them and take them out of the fight. Here's another magnificent Zulu club. This one has a leather thong on the end to be placed around the wrist, that it doesn't get lost or dropped in the heat of the combat, and you always have possession of your stick, and it's very hard for your assailant perhaps to pull it out of your hand. Here is an even bigger club with a tremendous shaft and a large head made of red ivory, very hard and heavy, a bit like ebony. And with a stick like this, I think that one could very comfortably ward off the attentions of a wild animal and particularly successful in battle. The length of the shaft is often dependent on the height of the man, because the longer the shaft, the more swing or arc you can get. But a small man below 6 feet would battle to swing a club of this length. But for a tall Zulu warrior, this would be an incredibly impressive and effective weapon in their possession. And then, of course, many sticks are far more elegant, far more elaborate, far more beautiful. I was fortunate enough to be given this stick by the commander of the Royal Regiment of Wales after a talk I gave in Brecon, that magnificent cathedral where many of the soldiers who perished at Isandlwana had indeed walked to, sung in, and worshipped at before their unfortunate end at Isandlwana. This magnificent stick has got a horn on the top, and in the horn they have placed in resin the most magnificent crest of the 24th Regiment of Foot with the Sphinx. The Sphinx was adopted by them after successfully engaging with Napoleon along the Nile in 1801. And this stick really is absolutely magnificent. It's quite long, could be used as a hill walking stick, but really too elaborate with its beautiful ferrule on the end for everyday use, but a stick that is very, very close to my heart and a stick that I love. I have this wild olive stick, which is a traditional Zulu walking stick, and a beautiful stick when one's walking up or down inclines to support one's knees. It fits beautifully in the hand. It's got a few cracks from age now, but a very, very old stick. And I wanted to show you, if I may, a stick that a good friend of mine who's very interested in the making of sticks in Johannesburg made for me, with a beautiful straight piece of kiat, and then he put a piece of leadwood on the top, the good old hard leadwood, one of the hardest woods available, and he shaped the head into the shape of Isandlwana with a lovely brass ferrule around it. And it says beautifully, to Rob, whose gab is truly gifted, with best wishes, Viv and Bron. And this stick too fits beautifully in the hand and is a magnificent tool and accessory when I'm doing my stories, either in this country or abroad in England. Now, isn't it wonderful to consider that in 1906, during the Bambata Rebellion, and the Zondi people down close to Tugela Ferry rose up against the colonial authorities. It was a revolt really against the poll tax and the hut tax that had been imposed upon them. And the local authorities came up with this quite crazy ruling that a Zulu man could only walk with a stick. A head had to be small enough to fit in his mouth. Now, this obviously precludes one from carrying a traditional Zulu club or weapon with a larger head used for offensive purposes. So the Zulus, in their typically inventive way, at this stage, very, very angry with the local authorities, went into the making of sticks like these. So this stick looks incredibly innocuous and straight, just like any other walking stick would look. And what they did was they got reinforcing iron and reinforcing bars, and they shaped them, and they carved out the inside of these sticks so that if a policeman wanted to intercept them, inspect their pass, their identification document, or particularly their weapon, they would offer the policeman the weapon. And the police would grab the end of the stick, and the Zulu could immediately pull out what became the most deadly of swords. So this was their response to being forced to carry sticks with their head small enough to fit in the mouth, which was a really quite ridiculous ruling. And the Zulus came up with these quite deadly stabbing sword sticks, which are still to be found in the Msinga and the Tugela Ferry area to this day. And I must say that whenever I have kids here who want to talk about and investigate the sticks, this is one of the sticks that attracts the most attention. And when youngsters return to my home, the stick they go to first and want to revisit the conversation about, is this traditional sword or stabbing stick as a result of the Bambata Rebellion in 1906. Here I have a very, very unusual, twisted and gnarled stick that has a wonderful background. This stick was given by a guest to a cruise director on one of the cruise ships I'm regularly engaged on, called Crystal Serenity. And this stick had stood in the corner of his office as a gift from a guest, and the cruise director really felt he had little use for it. And we were on a cruise up the west coast of Africa, and due to weather conditions, we couldn't land on Reunion Island. and the itinerary was changed at the last minute. And at that point, they asked me whether I was prepared to give another unscheduled lecture and story to try and entertain the guests. And I said I would with pleasure, but I wanted carte blanche to do what I chose to do. And I told a story that I called campfire storytelling, which was various little anecdotes and stories that I've collected over the years. As everyone was sitting around a campfire, on the video screen behind me, they had created a fire that was actually burning and moving, creating a moving background. And I sat in an armchair and I asked the cruise director if I could borrow the stick, which I'd seen regularly in his office. And after that talk that went particularly well and created a throng of guests to the little shop to buy my books and my DVDs and so forth, the cruise director said, I have no use for the stick, and I think that you should take it back home with you. So this stick indeed forms an integral part now of my larger collection and reminds me of a very special gentleman on that ship and a very special cruise that we were lucky enough to be part of up the west coast of Africa. And then you get these more elaborate sticks, typically made by those wonderful Zimbabwean craftsmen, where they take different types of stick, often kiat and ebony and some of the softer woods, and put a metal shaft down the middle to create a beautiful stick like this. And I have others on the screen behind me. Here's a short one right here with a wonderful carved head of a Matabele elder on the top. This stick too fits beautifully in the hand and is a magnificent tool when I'm telling my stories. For those of you who might be interested, behind me here is the wonderful Nyami Nyami stick. The Nyami Nyami is the river god of the Zambezi, very important in the Lozi culture, and they believe that there is this huge dragon or creature, the god of the Zambezi, called the Nyami Nyami, and that the Zambezi will never ever be tamed. And as a result, they have great reservations about the longevity of Kariba and Koborobasa, which have dammed the Zambezi. And I would like, perhaps in a later lecture, to tell you some of the stories about some of the other sticks in this wonderful, wonderful collection that I've been lucky enough to build since I was 15. So over the past 39 years, I've been adding to this collection. And it's amazing how many folks visit our home and they come in and the sticks attract as much attention as my photographs or anything else. It's a very unusual thing to collect. I hope you've enjoyed this little interlude about the sticks, and I hope you will continue to support me and follow me on Patreon, and I hope our paths will cross again. Thank you very much.